To another JR Bricks video. This is a little different because I'm recording this on my iPad, not what we normally do. But we are going to be ranking every Nintendo console and handheld. First off, we've got the Game & Watch. Now, the Game & Watch came out in 1980. It was before the Game Boy and before the NES or the Famicom. It didn't have a cartridge. You couldn't put a cartridge in, and they weren't that good. I'm gonna have to give it a D because it just wasn't that good. But then again, it was 1980. What handheld were you gonna use? Now, next up, we got the Nintendo Entertainment System, or the NES. Now, the NES came out in 1983, and it was a game breaker at the time, but it helped revive the game crash of 1983 because a bunch of Atari games were being made and they weren't official. It had great games. It had Mario Brothers. It had Super Mario Brothers, Donkey Kong. It had great games. I think I'm gonna give it an A. It was really good. Alright, next up we got the Game Boy. Sorry about that. I just put all my things out so you can see the thing. But anyway, next up we got the Game Boy. This was a huge step up from the Game & Watch because it ran on cartridges. It had a D-pad, start and select. And you had a little contrast thing on the side so you could like tweak it for where you're sitting. It was not in color though. That was the issue. It ran off 4 AA batteries, so with that, I'd give it an A as well with the NES. I mean, it's so good, but I mean, what are you gonna get? Next up, we got the SNES, or the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, the SNES was better than the NES. The NES was an 8-bit console, and the SNES was 16-bit. Fixed the controller, it had 4 buttons, and it had an eject button instead of having to insert cartridges inside like the NES. So it had some great games, Super Mario World, and it first introduced Super Mario Kart, which was the first Mario Kart game ever. It was still in 2D with the NES, so with that, I'm gonna give it a B, just because it wasn't a huge step up from the NES. Next up, we got the Game Boy Pocket. Where did I put that? Oh, it's right here, I think. Yep, that's it. So the Game Boy Pocket was basically only had 3 things different. It ran off 2 AA batteries instead of 4 AA's. No, it ran off 2 AA's. My bad. And it instead of the Game Boy, which had a green display, this had a black and white display, which was really cool. And it was a little bit smaller. That was basically it. So we're gonna put it at C. Oops. Sorry about the chart all smushed together. Next up, I think we're going with the Game Boy Light, and then we'll do the N64. So Game Boy Light was a little bit bigger than the Game Boy Pocket, and it literally had a backlit display. It wasn't very good one, but it was fine. I'd put with C with the Game Boy Pocket. Next up, we got the N64. Now, the N64 was great. I actually own one. I'm probably going to do a video on that. It introduced a joystick to the consoles, and it had cartridge support like all the other ones, but it was not backwards compatible, which wasn't very good. You can still use this on like some modern TVs today, but it was 3D, which was great at the time, but they had a major competitor, PlayStation, because it was using disc instead of cartridges, which made them store more data. So because of that, I'm gonna have to give this B. But it did have some great games like Super Mario 64 or that kind of stuff. We got the Game Boy Color next. Game Boy Color was not backlit, which was a little sad. It was smaller than the original Game Boy, and it had a color display, which was really nice at the time, and it was backwards compatible with Game Boy games. So I'm gonna have to put this in like S, literally, because it was so good. Now the next one's a bad one, the Virtual Boy. Sorry, I'm not going in order. We're just gonna do some now. We got the Virtual Boy. This thing sucked. It had a stand thing. It was red and black, too expensive. Controllers were awful. And it didn't even sell 1 million units. It sold 770,000 units. If you were to go on Wikipedia, you could see that. So it was awful. Literally, compared to other consoles, it had a neat 3D effect. And I think it was like copying the Game Boy's name, trying to get that kind of price. But because of that, I'm putting this as F. Next up, we got Game Boy Advance. So the Game Boy Advance was great, but there's another Game Boy Advance we'll get to in a minute. So the Game Boy Advance was different from the Game Boy because it was longer instead of like upwards. So it introduced a D-pad and had 2 shoulder buttons, and you had a smaller game cartridge and a shoulder buttons. It still ran off batteries, so I put this as A. Next up, we got the GameCube. So the GameCube was perfect, almost perfect. The controllers were amazing. It had memory card support. It used mini disc. It had 2 joysticks. It had great games, so you know what? S. So next up, we got the original DS. So the DS was amazing. It's the second best-selling console of all time. So DS was perfect. It had 2 screens. It had a stylus. It had 2 more buttons and a cartridge support. I mean, it was backwards compatible with Game Boy Advance games. Nothing below that. So it was great. It came right after the Game Boy SP, which I kind of forgot about, which we're going to do after this because I forgot about it. So the DS was bulky, though, because there's different models. So the original, I think I'll have to put this as C. Next up, we get, whoops. Wrong one. Sorry, guys. Next up, we got the Game Boy Advance SP. So this came before the DS. So it was perfect. For a while, this was a best gaming system. It was foldable. It was amazing. But the only thing that made it sad, it didn't have a headphone jack. Why? But it did have a backlit display, so you know what? Put that in S. So we got the Game Boy Micro. It came after the DS. I don't think this thing sold well. It's not comfortable. It only plays Game Boy Advance games because it's Game Boy. No backwards compatibility. But you can change the faceplates, which is really cool. I'm going to have to put this as B. Next up, we got the DS Lite. This came after the DS, and it was basically just a nicer DS. It was smaller and a little bit sleeker. That was all. But I think this is the best DS. I'm going to put this as A. Next up, we got the DSi. I own one of these things, and holy moly, are they good. They're not great compared to what the Switch is today. But, I mean, I think this came out in like 2010 or 2008. So, I mean, what are you going to get? So, it had a couple of cameras, but it did ditch the Game Boy Advance slot, which was pretty sad, but they are very cheap today. I bought mine for $45 and it works perfectly. It's blue. I actually did a video on ranking that think so. So I'm gonna have to put this as we're gonna put it as C with the regular DS. Next up, we've got the Wii. So the Wii was okay. No, what are you thinking, me? The Wii was great. It sold 102 million units. It had a Wii remote. You had different types of controllers, full-on disc support, and it was amazing. So we're gonna put this as, I'm gonna put it as S. Next up, we got the 2DS. Now this was awful. Don't even ask why I put this on here. No, we're just gonna, yeah, everyone just put it at F. Next we got the Wii U. Yeah, I put some bad ones on here. The Wii U was awful. Sold 13 million units. Next up we got the 3DS. I actually own one, but it's the 3DS XL. It's perfect. This is actually my first gaming system, which was cool. So the 3DS, it had a problem with the 3D, but overall it was good. It had a joystick instead of the D-pad, but it did still have a D-pad, which is great. So I think I'm going to put this as B. I'll put that as B. And next up, we have the best console ever, the Switch. Switch is great. Literally, it's at 1080p. I'm pretty sure it's the Joy-Cons are great, but they do get drift. Great selection of games. So yeah, I think it stays at S. So this is me ranking all the Nintendo handhelds and consoles. Like and subscribe. Go watch another one. Bye.